Hi, it's Norm Hanson again with another quick tip. This time I'm not talking about something you need to do, but something you should be aware of when you're submitting photos to different sites online or somewhere else other than just your phone or just your computer. So the first thing we need to look at really is the file format, and particularly you just need to photograph in JPEG. It's the standard used everywhere. And second thing to remember is it needs to be in RGB color space, but I'll talk more about that later. So first of all, I'm just going to photograph this picture. It's from my sketchbook about a year ago, Wooden Boats Festival down at Inverloch. So I'm in a photo editor now. This can see a variety of file formats. Here's an example of RAW file. There's also a HEIC file, which is the new file format for Apple. It's supposedly standard, but if you're on a Windows system you won't be able to read it, and most browsers won't be able to read it. So the key file format is actually JPEG. The name JPEG comes from the Joint Photographic Expert Group, which was a committee set up under the ISO organisation. They started working in 1983 and had various formats, but they've produced a standard format in 1992, and that's usually the one that's referred to as sRGB. Now that I've got my photo straightened and cropped, I'm ready to export it. I'm not going to talk about the file size at the moment, but I'm going to select one of the many formats. I'm using JPEG. I'm not going to talk about the quality here, it'll come in a second, and I'm just using the color space sRGB. An important aspect of the JPEG format was to do with compression, and it can achieve up to a 10:1 style compression. In the early days of the internet, that was a real bonus, because suddenly pictures, digital photos, which normally take up a lot of space, could be transmitted across relatively low bandwidths. The compression system in JPEG is known as a lossy system. As you reduce the file size and compress it, some detail is lost, and that item is defined as quality. In the case of my photo software, the quality is defined from going from 100, which is the uncompressed file, down to 0, which is basically compressed to nothing. And typically, if you compress it to 80, you probably won't even notice the difference. Social media often compresses down to about 60, and you really won't see the difference unless you again compare them. 40, you probably don't notice the distance in the small thumbnail, such as on the screen here, but once you get below 40, you can start to see the image quickly degrade. Once you compare an uncompressed with a heavily compressed file, you can see there's quite a difference, and the system starts to degrade very quickly at low file sizes or heavy compression, and it's particularly noticeable in gradual tones or tonal gradations, beautiful washes in watercolor, for instance, and you can see it produces striping where you just jump from one tonal range to another quite abruptly. So heavy compression is not suitable for watercolors. Many systems don't use the numeric quality, they just call it highest to lowest, or best or high would normally equate to about the 80 to 75% quality range. Alternatively, when you go to share a picture, you might see it asks you, is it for the web, email, or to save locally, and that will change the degree of compression that it's likely to produce. So the emailable quality is probably the one that you should go for when you're sharing. In the digital world, there are two quite different, what they call color spaces. These are different methods of mixing color. Firstly, there's the additive color mixing system, which matches your human vision. We've got cones and rods that are sensitive to green, red and blue light, and from that we make up the other colours. So cameras have filters, red, green, blue, over the top of their light sensors, and TV screens have phosphors, which are red, green and blue. That's called an additive system because when you add the light together you get different colours. So normally you would start off with something dark and then your eye or camera would see different amounts of illumination and at a different colour. There's a second quite different colour space which is used in printing, and that's where you see the colour on a surface, and it's called a subtractive colour mixing system because the surface itself absorbs one or more of the colours, and what it reflects back represents the colour that you see. This diagram compares what you would see with an RGB colour space on a screen versus a CMYK. C is cyan, M magenta, Y is yellow. They're the typical colour inks you get in a printer, and K represents black. So if the colours look a bit dark and dirty in your shared file, it could be because it was designed to be exported for a printer rather than a screen. So if you're going to the web or any online service, use sRGB. Of course Apple had to be different, and they don't use the standard sRGB, but the Apple RGB system for JPEG files is so similar you wouldn't notice the difference. So to conclude, if you're using a modern phone or camera and you've got it set to JPEG, you should be right, it'll be storing the file in sRGB. However, it's worth keeping an eye out. If your delicate tonal ranges look a bit striped, maybe the file's overcompressed. Alternatively, if the colours look dull and the overall image looks a bit dirty, perhaps you're in the wrong colour space. See ya.